What's up, everyone? So today we're kicking off a brand new series called Hear Me Roar. And I don't just mean roaring to scare your friends, but like roaring with confidence in the gospel and who Jesus says we are and who he made us to be. We're going to talk about how to be bold in our faith and convictions, even when the rest of the world is pressuring us to change, to compromise, or to conform. Because it's hard to be bold today. And I want us to come out of this series with a confidence that we've never had before and experience Jesus in a better and closer way. And speaking of confidence, some of the most confident people I know are a couple of 4-year-old twins named Billy and Tommy. Let me tell you what I mean. I was at Mike's house watching the twins and we were having some dinner. And Tommy, he wanted a waffle, so we had waffles for dinner. And in the middle of dinner, he just stands up, he takes his waffle, walks around the corner, and about 20 seconds later, he comes back, waffle in hand. And so I asked him, like, where'd you go? He looks me dead in the eyes and with a straight face as if I was just an idiot for even asking. I was peeing. And then he walks back to the table with his waffle and just sits down. And I don't think I've ever seen someone with as much confidence as that 4-year-old. Just gets up, walks to the bathroom, door wide open, waffle in hand, doesn't flush, doesn't wash his hands. What were you doing, bud? I was peeing. What does it look like? He's a bold kid. I'll give him that. But somewhere along the way in our life as we grow up, I think we lose some of this confidence, especially with our faith and our convictions. And you can blame it on social pressures or fear or feeling awkward or intimidated, whatever you want, but I don't think we're supposed to lose this childlike sense of wonder and confidence, especially when we have news as good as this. I know when I was your age, I was always feeling this pressure to fit in and be accepted and to be liked, which made the idea of just making waves by standing up for what was true, especially if it was unpopular, was terrifying for me. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think much has changed in that area since I was in middle and high school. And that's why for the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at the life of Daniel, who's going to teach us a lot about how to be bold. And so let's open up our Bible. Go ahead and you can pause the video while someone reads Daniel 1 through 19. Then when you're done, you can come back and hit play. Sweet, welcome back. So what we just read, this is a pretty intense situation. God's people were conquered by the enemy nation of Babylon, which was ruled by King Nebuchadnezzar. And he did not worship God, and he didn't want the people under his rule to worship him either. And so when Nebuchadnezzar conquered God's people, he immediately began the process of trying to get God's people to conform to his way of life in both big and small ways. And that's where Daniel and his friends come in. In this attempt to convert God's people to his way of life, King Nebuchadnezzar demands that Daniel and other young men like him come to the capital city to learn Babylon's language, history, and customs. And as part of the deal, Nebuchadnezzar arranged to have the men eat his food and wine, believing that his food and customs were the best way to make them strong. But Daniel and his friends, they resisted. They weren't about that stuff. The book of Daniel, it says that they refused to be defiled or made unclean by the king's food. And to be clear, there was nothing wrong with the food that the king was serving them. It wasn't poisoned or spoiled. It hadn't been dropped on the floor. They just chose not to eat the king's food in order to stand up for what they believed in. They were standing up to the king saying, we will not serve you. We're serving God alone. We're not going to do things your way. We'll do them God's way, and we'll trust that he will take care of us. You see, the food, it was really never the point. The point was they refused to submit to any kingdom that wasn't God's kingdom. And do you notice what happened to them as a result? God, he took care of them. And also, they didn't just keep up with their competition because of this, they outperformed them. And now, you might not realize this, but you actually have a lot in common with Daniel. You may not have been conquered by an enemy nation that wants to have you give up your faith in God, but here's what you do have in common with Daniel. You both live in a world whose values and priorities clash with the values and the priorities of God. In our world today, God gives us commands that sound pretty different from the world's way of doing things. Like the world says, make all the money that you can, but Jesus, he says, give it all away. The world says, an eye for an eye, but Jesus says, love your enemies. The world says, fame and popularity are the goal, but Jesus says, put others first. The world says, follow your heart, but Jesus says, follow me. We might not be living under the rule of the kingdom of Babylon, but we are absolutely living in a world that is in conflict with the kingdom of God, and it's going to require some boldness from us to not give in to the pressures around us. Paul says in Romans 12, I urge you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Just like Daniel did, Paul, he encourages us to live a life that looks different than the rest of the world. He tells us not to conform, but to be transformed by God from the inside out. Standing out, it's never comfortable or easy. Standing out, it requires boldness. It requires faith. But this is what God is calling us to, a life that's different, set apart, one that doesn't conform to the ways of any kingdom except for God's. Daniel, he made a bold decision not to conform to the patterns of this world, and you can too. And so how do we do that? Or even why should we do that? It's because we are living in a world of darkness. But the good news is that out of that darkness came a great light. That's Jesus. Because of his life, death, and resurrection, he allows us to be transformed and live with a peace that surpasses all understanding. And for those of us who call ourselves Christians, we have access to that because of him. We don't live counterculturally to our world in defiance or arrogance. We live in contrast to the darkness of our world to show them the light and that there is a better way of living that is truly satisfying. It's like eating junk food for every meal of every day. I mean, it sounds great at first, right? But you get to day 5 or 30 or day 100 of eating nothing but Doritos, and you realize quickly that you need some real nourishment. And the world around us, it has a lot of junk. And God, he wants to use you to show the world that there's a better way, like a more satisfying way, a way to live that will fill you up, which is why I am so fired up for this series, and I hope that you are too.